Hi guys, this is Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn. I post videos about plants and projects, and today is plant watering day. I know everyone out there tells you not to water your plants on a schedule, and I will tell you that sometimes too, but I water my plants on a schedule because I have all pretty easy plants that have similar watering needs, and honestly, I try not to overthink things and it just makes my life easier. So I thought since it's plant watering day, it will be a good time to walk through some of the general maintenance I do on my big plant watering days. Now, every plant watering day isn't necessarily as crazy as this one. This is like the everything shower of plant watering days. I carry everything over to the sink, which I'm standing in front of right now. I have some towels laid out that I will show you. I clean off the foliage, I trim the plants. This is the big one. So I generally try and do this about once a month just to keep on top of pest management, trimming dead foliage, and giving the plants a good thorough soak in the sink to flush out the soil. So my setup is pretty simple. Everyone always asks me how long it takes to water my plants, and honestly, I have it kind of down to a science where it takes about an hour when I'm doing the big watering. I have a very clean kitchen right now, and I have 2 towels laid out because I find an assembly line method helps me water my plants faster and more efficiently. So I will soak them in the sink and then I will set them on a towel to finish kind of drying off before I put them back, mostly in my sunroom. So we're gonna start on this side of the sunroom here. You see we have a variegated Hoya rope, we have a monstera dubia, a Hoya linearis, and a rickrack cactus here. And I think that these are going to fill up the sink for the first round of watering. So let's carry them over and get started. Okay, I couldn't end up fitting all 4 of the plants I showed you in here, so I grabbed a whalefin snake plant instead. I have 4 plants in here, and I will show you what it looks like when I bulk water all of them. So here's a look at everything in the sink. Looking good. I don't see anything that jumps out at me right away as problematic for any of these. So I'm going to turn on the tap here. Yes, I do use tap water for all of my plants, and I have a little shower setting on here that I love for watering plants. And I will just thoroughly soak the soil for all of these. So I'd say the 2 Hoyas here and the whalefin snake plant have very similar water needs, but monstera dubia is not far off. So we're just gonna give them all a thorough soak because, as a reminder, the best way to water your plants is to give them less frequent deep soaking washes as opposed to more frequent shallow watering. When you water them deeply, as I'm doing here, it thoroughly saturates the soil and allows the roots to gather up all the moisture they need to keep the plant growing. And it also encourages optimal root development. If you are giving your plants frequent shallow watering, so just a little bit of water maybe every couple days, that's only going to really penetrate the top few inches of the soil, which is not great for your plants because, first of all, a lot of your roots are a lot lower than the top few inches of soil, and fungus gnats really like to lay their eggs in the top few inches of your plant soil. So if you've ever had issues with fungus gnats, it could be because you're not letting your soil dry out enough between waterings. And a lot of times that can happen with more frequent shallow watering. So what I like to do is deeply soak all of my plants in the sink and then let them dry out at least halfway for all of the plants that I have. Some of them dry out almost completely or completely before I water them again. Now, after I have finished thoroughly soaking the soil, I will let the excess water drain out for like a minute or so, and then I will shake the plant to get as much excess water out of the bottom as I can, and then I'll inspect each plant individually. So I'll lift up the stems, I'll quickly look under the leaves. This is not rocket science and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. I just give a visual once over to the majority of the plant to look for any signs of pests. I also look for any signs of dying, wilting, yellowing, browning foliage, and I snip those off. So we're gonna start with our variegated Hoya rope plant first. So for my Hoya rope plant here, there's a lot of nooks and crannies in the Hoya rope plant's leaves. So I like to try and really get in there, take a peek inside the leaves to make sure I don't see anything hanging out there that shouldn't be. On one of my recent videos I did on uncommon, easy houseplants to add to your collection, someone commented and said that they love Hoya ropes, but they are just such a hassle for pests because the pests can hide in all of these little nooks and crannies in the leaves, which is totally true. So I have been lucky with this plant so far. And honestly, a lot of that I think is luck, but a lot of it is also keeping on top of regular inspections and making sure that when you water the plants, you're rinsing them off completely just to clean off those leaves, maybe flush something out before it has a chance to totally move in and set up shop. And then it also cleans off the leaves, so I don't like to use any sort of leaf shine or anything. So this is a good opportunity to do that. Now, I'm not seeing any signs of pests, which is great on this one, but this one also can really pool water in the leaves, which I like to avoid for this plant because I don't want to lead to any fungal issues. So if I see any pooling water, I'll just kind of gently shake the plant here. I do want to point out a couple areas on this plant. So this leaf right here, this one I may have let go a little bit too long without water because I'm seeing some minor leaf yellowing on some of the oldest leaves, which is generally a sign that I have waited a little bit too long or underwatered. Now we are in February right now in Maryland Zone 7A, so we are definitely in the middle of winter. My tropical plants really aren't looking their best. So it's totally normal to have some yellowing leaves or some issues with optimal development over the winter. So this leaf, I'm just gonna snip off. I'm gonna take that, throw it aside. I will try to remember not to make a habit of that because I don't wanna have to be pulling off so many older leaves that the plant is looking really kind of like bald at the soil line. So this one is looking pretty good. I'm gonna keep an eye on these two leaves here because they're looking like they may be suffering a similar fate, but I'm not gonna pull them off just yet. And this one is looking good and is pretty much drained. So what I'm going to do now is carry it over to the waiting area. And I'm going to let this one just continue drying off a little bit more here while I inspect the other plants. My monstera dubia is looking really good. I actually just trimmed this one up recently to start a couple of propagations for our Master Gardener plant sale. But you can see on here, this leaf right here shows some pest damage from a couple years ago. The pests were on the underside of the leaves and I was able to catch them early and treat the plant and rinse everything down and spray it down so that all of the remainder of the growth on this stem came out fine. Now I will say for this one, I have two different plants in this pot and I always say I like to wait to repot my plants until the roots are either super root bound in the plant pot or they are growing out of the drainage holes. This is an awesome example of that. So this looks like a really healthy root that's looking for more space to grow. Now, since it's February, I am going to avoid repotting this one a little bit more until it warms up a bit so I can lessen the chances of transplant shock when I'm repotting this. But this is a great example of why you should be taking things out and inspecting them because you want to catch things like this before the plant starts to show signs of suffering on its foliage. My whale-fin snake plant here, this is another one that I've been monitoring for a while. If you look at it from the side, you can see that the leaf is really going that way. And it's because whale-fin snake plants spread via rhizomes under the surface, and that's exactly what this rock-looking thing trying to come above the surface of the soil is. Now, these structures are so strong that they can and will break pots, especially like an untreated terracotta pot, that they're a little bit more fragile. So I love the pot that this one is in. So I'm gonna set this one aside actually, and I think it's about time for me to try and take this plant out of the pot to cut off that growth there and try and pot it up separately so that I can keep this big single leaf happy and healthy in here without damaging the pot. Now, it's not ideal to be doing that in February, but at this point, I've been monitoring this one for several months and I do think it's time. So I'm gonna set this one on the other side because it needs a little bit of attention. Now my linearis, I kind of baby. I treat this one with a little bit of extra care than I do my other plants because it is one of my favorites. So now that I've emptied out all of the other plants, I'm going to move all of the foliage very carefully in here. And don't freak out if I lose a couple leaves because they are a little bit fragile. And then I'm going to rinse off all of the foliage for this plant while I have it in the sink. So obviously this one would be super hard to clean all of the leaves individually because they're small and fragile. So the last thing I want is to be in a situation where this plant has a pest infestation and I have to treat it individually or cut off parts of the plant that are infected. So this one, I make sure to give a really good rinse down whenever I'm doing my everything shower of plant washing day, just to help keep the leaves clean and maybe kick out anything that could be moving in. And rinsing off these plants with like a lukewarm water is actually really great for their overall health too, because these are tropical plants, and if you look closely on the linearis, you will see it has lots of little spots with some aerial root growth. So I like to think that this kind of helps them feel like they're getting a nice rain shower like they would in their natural habitat, but in the middle of winter here in Maryland, Zone 7, where it's very cold and very dry. Now, one of the things I've been monitoring super closely with this plant, I had it unfortunately too close to a window. So when I first moved this one to where I have it in the sunroom, I had it close to a south-facing window, and it seemed to be doing really well, but I didn't monitor it really enough as the days started getting longer and the sun started getting a little bit stronger. And the side that was up against the window did end up showing some serious signs of fading and yellowing just from too much light. So I've been slowly trimming off some of those spots. I'll show you close up here because it's kind of hard to see unless you're like in person. Hopefully the light will show you the difference here. So you can see some of this foliage here is a little yellowing. This is the area in the back of the plant that was right up against the window. And then this is all what the foliage should look more like, a good solid green color. So I didn't want to completely give it a total haircut when I discovered it. So I've just been kind of slowly pruning off some of this more unsightly yellower growth. This one is going to come off today. Now, I'm not even going to bother trying to propagate these because they're not the healthiest stems, and this is already a harder plant for me to propagate, so I definitely don't want to try working on a propagation with a less than ideal start. So this is a good one that's about to get trimmed off. I finished snipping off everything that is going today, so now we are going to gently move this one up to our dry zone. And this one really illustrates why I have a towel here, because this foliage just is really gonna need a minute to dry here, and it's super heavy when it's wet, and I just wanna be really careful with it and not track a ton of water back into the sunroom. So I'm just gonna try and gently spread this out to encourage some drying. And then sometimes if it's a little bit warmer outside, I'll just carry a plant outside and shake it real fast just to get the majority of the water off before I lay it out on a towel to dry, but it is like 25 degrees outside, so that's not gonna happen today. And now it's time to really start the watering assembly line. So we've moved everything either to the side that I need to work on some repotting or to the side where it's drying on the towel. So now it's just time to fill the sink up again and repeat the process. So I'm just gonna continue working my way around the room. I'm gonna target the rickrack here next and a couple of the other things I have on this little plant shelf. Probably these four right here. We'll take a closer look at them next. We've got our second round loaded up here, and I'm going to visually inspect before I water because this is one that always makes me super paranoid. Look at these little aerial root growths here. I always think they're mealybugs. Every time I walk into the room, it like kind of catches my eyes. Probably because my mom's exact plant like this got mealybugs recently, so I have been on high alert watching to make sure I don't have any mealies moving into mine. But all of these are just aerial roots. They're not mealybugs. And we're just gonna repeat the process here of rinsing everything down. I've got my rickrack cactus here, which is an epiphyllum. Rinsing down all of the stems. Fun fact, these are actually not leaves on the rickrack cactus. They are stems, they just look like leaves, which is very cool. This is a super resilient plant. It's one of the plants I featured in the video about super easy, unique houseplants to add to your collection. Epiphyllum in general are some of my favorites because they produce really gorgeous flowers at night. In their natural habitat, they bloom only at night because they are pollinated by bats and moths and whatnot, which is very cool. I love it when they open up their flowers in the sunroom. This one has bloomed a couple times. This one over here is actually a mix of different types of epiphyllum. I went into kind of a fugue state one night and ordered a big box of different epiphyllum cuttings. And originally I had them all potted up separately because they're all different plants with different color flowers, but I just decided to throw them in together. And one day when they're mature, if they start giving me different colored flowers, that'll just be pretty cool. This one down here is a Marble Queen pothos propagation that I was working on for someone else and then decided to keep it because I love Marble Queen pothos. And then we've got another Hoya down here. This is a Hoya croniana. I think that's how you say it. So we have pretty thoroughly watered all of these, and I've checked most of them for pests already. So right now I'm gonna look over them for any signs of foliage that I need to trim off. First up, we're gonna take a look at this pothos because this is one of my newer plants, and I've had this one pretty high light, so the variegation on this Marble Queen is really making her look in Snow Queen territory, which is another thing I want to do a video on, Marble Queen versus Snow Queen. I used to think they were different plants, but you know, I'm try to do better when I know more, and it seems that the popular consensus in the houseplant community is that Snow Queen pothos plants are actually just very highly variegated Marble Queen pothos. I'm gonna bring you back here to show you a better look because it's a little blown up there by the window. So you can see the leaves in the back here have a little bit more green, a little bit more of a mint base, but these, oh my gosh, the leaves are like almost white with some nice green speckling. So the new growth on this one is looking really, really great. I'm gonna set this one back in her pot to finish draining. This cute black cat pot. I got this from a little plant shop here in Frederick, Maryland called Take Root. If you're local, highly suggest it. The owner is absolutely wonderful. Her name is Caitlin. And then this epiphyllum here, this is also, as I mentioned, a series of cuttings I got online, so I'm not gonna do any trimming on this one for now, but I am gonna highlight the super cute pot it's in. My friend Stephanie, who owns the company Fern and Folk, she makes these butt pots along with a bunch of other really cool pots. I highly recommend her work. She's local to me. She's in Baltimore, Maryland, and she does a little bit of shipping online. I will link her Instagram and her shop, her website, in the description here. Definitely a fun follow on Instagram. But if you're in the area, anywhere around Baltimore or Frederick, she does a lot of pop-up markets at different things. Now this one, I feel like I've kept a really close eye on this Hoya because I feel like it's been losing a lot of leaves. Every time I go to water this one, there's a yellow leaf that I have to pick off. There's something going on with this one, and I may need to just repot it, which I'll probably put that off until it gets a little warmer out. Overall, I'd say it looks pretty good, and it has given me a couple flowers. So when I prune this one, I try and be really careful that I'm not pruning off any peduncles, which is what the Hoya flowers come from, what they bloom from. So I'll show you here what that looks like. So this is a Hoya peduncle, and this peduncle is quite long because this one has bloomed multiple times. So every time it blooms, it will get a little bit longer. And this one is not one of my older Hoyas, but it has several peduncles on it. And when I do prune this plant, if I can get a peduncle off of it on a cutting, I try to, because then when I pass it along to people, they already have a plant with a peduncle. And a lot of times the peduncles will not stay, they will continue. I've even had propagations with peduncles bloom while in water, which is nuts. But I do see a little area up here that I'm going to go ahead and trim off. I wasn't sure initially if this was just new, smaller, yellowing growth, but I'm pretty sure since it's falling off pretty easily that it's an area I need to trim off just to help encourage some new growth. And then I'm also going to show you guys another area I'm going to trim off here. So a lot of people are scared of cutting their plants. I know it's just like a mental thing. You got to get over it. Trimming your plants is one of the best ways to encourage healthy new growth. I prune anytime anything looks even remotely suspect, I'm gonna cut it off. There are a lot of different opinions on whether or not this is the best thing to do, whether or not you should let the leaves completely die off before you cut them off, or whether it's okay to cut them off when they're still yellowing. I cut them off as soon as they start looking ugly because I don't want the plant putting any effort into maintaining those leaves. And on plants like this variegated Hoya, I also cut off anything that's starting to look a little bit undesirable in its variegation. So I don't want any stems that are going to start completely reverting. There's one I'm kind of monitoring here and trimming up a little bit because it is starting to look a little bit less variegated than the rest of the plant. So I'll show you guys here in a second. This stem right here is not really showing optimal variegation, so I've been trimming it back a little bit to see if it doesn't start pushing out some new, better variegation. This is what we really want it to look like. This beautiful silver variegation on here is one of the reasons I love this Hoya so much. I really love silver plants. So, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one off today. Why not? My rickrack, we're not going to be doing any pruning on because this one I like to let go a little bit crazy. I think it really suits the style of this plant's growth and the shape of the stems to just let it go a little bit wild. Next up, we've got our fernleaf cactus, which is a Solanacereus, I believe. It's a tropical cactus. It looks a lot like an epiphyllum, but it is not, I believe, an epiphyllum. I think this might be one of the plants I have that has a couple different names, and its botanic classification has changed a couple times, like as is often the case. This one I've been monitoring really closely for signs of scale because there are a couple times I've seen some little brown spots on it where I kind of freak out and think, oh my gosh, is that scale? And then I peel it off and it ends up being nothing, but they keep coming back. See this little spot right here? So I have had scale on a jade plant before and on an umbrella plant. So I'm pretty familiar with what it looks like, but you know, I'm not so sure that this is what should be happening to this plant or not. So I generally just pick off or rinse off anything I see that doesn't look normal. And this one has been suffering a lot this winter with some yellowing foliage. You can see down here, I've been doing a lot of chopping on it. This area probably needs to go today as well. I'm gonna chop that off. I did chop this stem down completely. You can see some new growth coming out right here. So that's what happens when you cut off growth that isn't ideal on your plants. It will rebound, it'll sprout new growth, and the new growth will look healthier and happier than the ugly old growth. So don't be afraid to trim your plants. Don't be afraid to give them a haircut. It can make them healthier and bigger and bushier. And then this is just one of my holiday cactuses here. This was a cheap grocery store holiday cactus that blooms like crazy, these super hot pink blooms around Thanksgiving and Christmas every year. This one's also in one of my favorite pots. This pot is from Thanksgiving Farms and Unique Gardens in Adamstown, Maryland. I really love that nursery for perennials. A lot of my perennials are from Thanksgiving Farms and Unique Gardens, but they have a really amazing houseplant selection as well. And the owners are just wonderful. I highly recommend taking a trip out there if you're anywhere local. They have a huge selection. So that's what my holiday cactus lives in. And my drop zone over here for drying plants is getting a little bit full, and it's been about 10-15 minutes, so it's probably time to start moving things back into the sunroom so that we have more room for new plants as the assembly line continues. I'll just start by putting back anything, even though I just watered this one, anything in a cache pot or that I could really easily shake dry, because I know it's not going to leak onto my windowsills or furniture surfaces, and I know that I've gotten most of the moisture off, or that it could honestly benefit from a little bit of extra moisture, as is the case with this holiday cactus here. So I'm not too worried about this one having issues with extra moisture because it's right here next to a window and the sun will take care of that anyway. And next we're gonna put back some of the first plants we did. This big boy, I can't even remember where I had this one. Did I have it here? Who knows? I move this one around a lot. The cats like to knock it over. Put this one back here. It's a cute little hanging spot. Now I know it's not a good idea to have them hanging from the trim, but I've just really been putting off putting another hole in the ceiling, another hook. I'd like to at some point. And I love the little disco ball lights this one creates. If you saw my sunroom tour that I posted outlining all my different plants in here, I have rearranged a little bit since that tour. I just felt like I needed it one day. So I moved the shades over here, and part of that was so that I could more easily access my Hoya tower here. This is an IKEA shelving unit. It is I think it's the Lac line. They have the little single shelves too, and I've had this for many years. I kind of wish it were black in here, but I'm not gonna get a new one because this one works perfectly fine, and it's great for displaying all of my different vining Hoyas. So I am going to start carrying the Hoyas over from the Hoya tower for their little bath. So next up, we've got a Hoya bilobata over here, which was originally from a hanging basket at Lowe's, which is really, really great find for the Hoya lovers out there. A Hoya Chelsea, which is a type of carnosa, Hoya carnosa Chelsea. A Hoya Wayeti over here, and in the back, a Hoya carnosa crinkle 8. So the crinkle 8 and the Chelsea are both types of carnosas, and they actually look very similar. The crinkle 8 is called that because its leaves have 8 dimples in them, if you count them. But I find, oh, that's actually Chelsea. See, they look that similar. This is a crinkle. The crinkle leaves I find are a little bit skinnier than the Chelsea's leaves, but they look extremely similar. So this is a crinkle, Hoya carnosa crinkle 8, and this is a Hoya Chelsea. So the leaves are also dimpled and crinkly, but they're a little bit wider, and I think look a little bit more like a traditional carnosa. So we're just gonna check these out. These all seem to be showing no signs of pest issues or anything. I really baby my Hoyas as a serious Hoya lover. Hoyas are one of those plants that I just feel like they don't get enough love. They get a lot of love in the houseplant hobbyist community, but for average people who are wanting to get into plants, I never see Hoyas recommended, and a lot of Hoya varieties are difficult, but a lot of them are also very similar, or very easy to care for, and have similar care needs, which is why I group all of these Hoyas together on the Hoya tower, because they like similar lights, they like similar water, and they just look really pretty. So I definitely recommend all the varieties you see here for beginners, any type, any variety of carnosa, which I'll show you a couple more in this video, and also the Wayeti and the bilobata. These two, you can find these at big box garden stores if you're lucky. Now it is a bit early for some serious propagation here. I generally like to wait until spring, but I'm also working on a lot of different cuttings for our Master Gardener plant sale. And this is an example of an area where I would prune off the plant to help encourage fullness. So when you look at this, you see this stem is so densely packed with leaves and foliage that you can hardly even see the stem. Whereas this one, it's got these two healthy leaves up here, and then it's got some bare nodes and a long stretch here. So this will be a really great place. I'll cut right here, and then I will root this stem to grow another plant. Carnosas are awesome for propagating because you can root them anywhere on the stem. You don't have to have like a specific spot to root, like a growth point. And again, this is a carnosa variety, so I can just take this and shove it down in soil and keep it moist and it will grow, or I could just put it in water and be lazy and put off potting it up for a while until it grows some water roots, which is what I usually do when I'm propagating. So I'm gonna set this one aside for propagation. And what will happen is that plant will then sprout new growth, and hopefully it will fill out just as the stem has. Next, we're gonna take a look at our Hoyas, which honestly, I don't even know if that's how you say this plant's name, but it's this one. This also looks very similar to a Hoya Kentiana, which I have also had. I found the Kentiana leaves to be a little bit longer and leaner, but they look extremely similar. Honestly, if someone told me this was a Kentiana and not a Hoyas, I would not be surprised. So what we're gonna do is look at these stems here. So this one started trailing really nicely, but when I look at these stems, I see what I was talking about with the crinkle 8 a second ago. I see a couple areas on the stem that are looking a little bit bare. So when I go all the way up here, I see this growth point only has 1 leaf, this one has 2, this one has 1, this one has 1. So it's looking a little bit more sparse than I would like it to look. Same thing with this one. This one is looking a little sparse. Actually, no, this one looks pretty good. It's just getting a little long. So I will leave this one alone, but I am going to trim off this one. Now this one, you do need a growth point for propagation. So I'll show you in a second where I'm going to cut this. And then I'll try and root this one as well. I've had mixed success rooting this plant, but might as well try if it's a healthy stem. So I'm gonna take this cutting, I'm gonna cut it up a couple times to get a couple different plants. I'm gonna take off this bottom leaf here. And then this is going to be where the new roots grow from. I'm gonna stick that down into the soil and chop this up and do that a couple times to hopefully grow a new plant. And then just gonna give the Hoyas another quick once over here. See one little yellowing leaf that I've trimmed off from the base. Kind of nitpicky, but we're gonna trim it all off while we have it here. I'll set that one to the side. Now let's check out the Chelsea. I love this one. This one is kind of gives the same vibe as the rickrack cactus does to me. The growth is just kind of crazy. It grows up, it grows down, it grows out to the side. I found this one to be a little bit less of a climber, but there are some areas where I feel like it could maybe benefit from a pole, though I'm gonna keep growing this one as a trailing plant since I have it on my Hoya tower. This one is looking good and pest-free. There's no real areas of concern on the plant, but there are a couple areas where I think I'm going to take some cuttings for propagation, just like we did with the Hoyas and the crinkle 8. This one, see this stem here is looking a little bare. So we're gonna trim that off. And again, I know it's hard. You want your plants to grow big and trailing and be nice and gorgeous, but sometimes you have to cut to make that happen. It's just like your hair. You wouldn't just let your hair grow for years without giving it any sort of trim because it would be super unhealthy and unattractive. Plants are the same way. They need trims just like our hair does. And the last one here. This one I probably will not be trimming too much. I have trimmed this one a lot. I love it in this pot because I feel like it kind of looks like our hair. This one I have not been letting get too long because I find when it gets too long, it starts to get a little bit stringy looking. But you know, there are a couple areas on here I'm gonna trim up here, just a couple of the little bits of leggy growth toward the end. Just gonna snip that. And I'm not even gonna bother propagating these. Again, being careful. Ooh, this is excellent. This is really good to show you guys. So this is, see if I can get it to focus here. This is a peduncle that has the very beginnings of a Hoya bloom on it. So this one should be blooming pretty soon, which is very exciting. This one is a very prolific bloomer for me. It didn't bloom for years, and then one year it just started going crazy. I'm just gonna check and make sure there's nothing else on here that we need to trim up. Everything's looking pretty good. Trim this though. All right, next up on our list here is this really cute little windowsill plant holder displayer thingy that I got from IKEA. I love this for small plants and kind of maximizing the vertical space on a windowsill. First up, we've got this little Hoya Mathilde. We've got a Hoya Obscura that I actually pretty much killed last year. So I hacked up the salvageable portions of the plant and propagated it. So that's this new one here. And that's also in a really cute fern and folk pot that my friend Stephanie made. I've got another epiphyllum container of a bunch of random epiphyllums, and then this one is a Hoya pubicalyx on a cute little snake plant, acrylic plant trellis that I made. This one I grew from cuttings from my mom's huge Hoya pubicalyx, and this one has done pretty well under my care. I'm surprised how quickly this one has taken off, considering it's generally a pretty slow grower, but that one is quickly becoming one of my favorites. I love how it grows both up and out, and it trails. And then this is a silver dollar succulent, which off the top of my head, I don't know if I can remember the name. It's a Xeros Danguii, I think it's called. And this is a true succulent. It's not succulent-like Hoyas are. So it likes lots and lots of light, and it likes to dry out completely between waterings. So I have a little bit more space in the sink here, so I'm gonna go grab a couple other plants for this bulk watering session here. And I'm gonna throw in my big Hoya obovata, which I have a care video all about. This is definitely one of my top 3 favorite plants. It struggled a lot when I first got it. I didn't have it in the best conditions for it. I was overwatering it a little bit. The soil was a little bit too heavy, so I'm really happy to see it thriving over the last couple of years. So we're gonna start watering these in the sink just like the others. And I did also want to mention that I do fertilize my houseplants, but it's February here, so you know they're not really actively growing. My whole goal here is to just keep them happy and looking good enough, happy enough until the spring, until the days start getting a little bit longer and the temperatures rise a little bit, and they get more light and a little bit more humidity, and so they really start showing that new spring growth. At that point, I will start fertilizing them. Now, generally for my houseplants, I use the Fox Farm Grow Big fertilizer. This is kind of pricey for a bottle of it, but it lasts forever. I think I'm only on my 2nd bottle. It's very highly concentrated. I generally will give that to all of my houseplants roughly once a month in the spring, summer, and early fall. Whenever I start seeing them pushing out consistent new growth, that's when I know it's time to start fertilizing. This one is looking pretty good. This one was an amalgamation of cuttings from another plant, so this one hasn't really taken off with its growth so far yet. This one will probably need prune sometime in the next couple months. This guy here, I have not cut at all yet because I've kind of been waiting on its growth to really take off, since this one did start off as tiny propagations last year, but it's looking really good. I think maybe later on this spring will be the first time I take a cutting from this one to propagate, which is always very exciting when you can take cuttings from plants that started out as cuttings. Nice little circle of life there. And then this one here. This one is also looking pretty good. I always struggle with this one, honestly. Like, I think this is a really cool plant and I like it a lot, but I've had a hard time finding a really good place for it where it doesn't like kind of get annoying with how big it is. And as you can see on all of these growth points, I have cut it quite a lot, quite a few times when it was getting just too big and annoying. So we'll see what I do with it in the spring. This may be one that ends up on the chopping block if I can't find a good spot for it. And then last but not least, we have our big, gorgeous Hoya obovata, which is looking great. I see no issues on this one, no signs of pests, nowhere that I really want to trim on this one. I'm already rooting a couple cuttings of this plant from some leggy growth that I took a couple months ago that I'm just trying my hand to see how well it propagates right now. This is an area where I may consider cutting in the future, because this just has a single leaf here and then it's got all of this empty space. So we'll see how this develops over time. This may, whoops, see, just what I was saying, this annoying thing always gets in the way. These things latch onto everything, and although I love the plant, it can just be a little annoying sometimes and make a little bit of a mess when it gets stuck on things and I end up knocking it over. So clean this guy up and go put him back. He will live another day in my house, but we'll see how long that lasts. Now it's time to tackle watering some of these big guys. All of these hanging up here are pretty much so big that I water them one by one in the sink. Some of the Hoyas I might throw in together. This is my Cebu Blue pothos. This one I actually just ended up moving in here from our living room because I felt like it was really not reaching its fullest potential in the light levels I had it in there. I was trimming it for leggy growth a ton. So this one just got moved out here about a month ago. So I'm excited to see how this one takes off in these conditions for spring. Now at this point in the watering process, this is definitely where things slow down a little bit because I've got these big hanging ones in here that I need to rinse off, and then I have to pull them off to the side to dry off a little bit and give them their nice little soak in here. But while I'm rinsing it off, I'll just kind of give it a quick once over, see if I see any leaves. This leaf looks a little yucky, a little yellowing. Just pluck them off. Oh, there's one. This one right here. This one just has kind of an ugly brown tip to it. So I'll just pluck those off. And then this one is one that I do prune regularly. So all of my pothos plants I prune very regularly to encourage fullness and bushy growth, because when you prune your plants, the new growth that occurs is going to come off at somewhat of an angle from the stem. So it's going to create a fuller plant over time with a much bushier growth habit. This Hoya rope here is one that I got for super cheap at Lowe's. And it's one of my favorite plants. I already have a Hoya rope and usually do not have multiples of plants just due to space. But this one I picked up and I thought, oh, I'll just pass this along to someone else, or, you know, do something else with it, put it somewhere else in my house. But I think what I'm gonna do with this one is keep it going until early May, when I separate it into a bunch of smaller plants for the Master Gardener plant sale. And I think I've said this a million times, but my favorite part about Hoyas is their flowers. And this one, which I just got last year, has its first peduncle and flower on the way, which is super exciting because I have Hoyas that I've had for many, many years that have not flowered. So the fact that this one has at least one peduncle that I've found on here already is super exciting. And I'll love to be able to pass that on to someone else one day. This is my big, beautiful Hoya Crimson Queen. This is one similar to the Linearis that I let get a little bit of leaf scorch last year by being too close to a window without a sheer curtain. So I have been slowly trimming off some of this yellowing growth on this one as well, and I think I'll do a little bit of that today. As you can see, it's got a ton of new healthy variegated growth all over it. And I know a lot of people say to cut off these leaves here because, you know, they don't do anything for the plant. They don't help keep the plant alive in any way because they do not have chlorophyll in the leaves. That's why they're so light. And especially these like super pretty creamy ones. But I leave them on. They generally just die off on their own. I let the plant just take care of it. If it decides that it doesn't want to keep something on the plant, then it's not going to, much like this one right here. This is a perfect example. So these are two examples of all white variegated leaves that I just left on and let the plant take care of them itself. There's one more down here. Now, if I did notice there was a strand that just was only producing the all white leaves, like I was keeping an eye on this one here, it had several all white leaves, but then it gave me these really pretty pink ones. So I'm not gonna cut this one off just yet. I'm going to continue monitoring for the type of leaves it's producing. If I get too many all white leaves on one stem, I may trim them off just because I don't want the whole plant to look like that. I do want some nice variegation on these still. Now, unlike my Hoya Crimson Queen, which has been great, almost no issues, my Hoya Crimson Princess is one that I've been keeping a really close eye on for a while. I haven't had any pest issues on this one, but I just find that whenever I'm watering this plant, I find leaves that have died off, I find issues, I find drying leaves, and I just feel like it's a little bit higher than what I'd like to see in a healthy plant. So for example, look at this leaf, it's got some like brown spots on it. And then as I was carrying it over, I also saw a couple yellowing leaves, which looks like oh, they fell off in the sink. So I'm watering this one with the same frequency as my other Hoyas, which seem to be very happy with it. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is in the spring, when it gets a little bit warmer, I am going to repot this one into maybe a lighter, chunkier mix. I'm wondering if maybe the soil is a little bit too heavy for it. I do still have this in the same soil it came in when I got it many, many years ago, just because I haven't seen any other signs that it needs repotting. But if your plant is suffering and there are no other obvious signs, I always tell people you may want to try repotting it, because it could just be due for maybe a slightly bigger pot, some fresh soil, some soil that's a little bit higher quality. That's generally what I will resort to if I'm having issues with one of my plants and I'm not really sure what the reasoning is behind the issues. Now we're starting to enter the end of the road period for watering day. And this is the period where I start to get a little tired and I'm ready to be done watering my plants, especially today, because since I'm filming, it's taking me a little bit longer. This one is my kind of sad looking fiddle leaf fig at this point. This one started off as a small propagation, probably in 2018 or 2019. You can see how large it is here compared to me. And this one, I've just been slowly removing the leaves as it grows up, so it retains that like bobble looking look. And I just removed a couple because they were yellowing recently. This one really needs repotted. It needed repotted last year and I just never got around to it. So this spring will definitely be when we finally repot this one into something a little bit bigger, a little bit bottom heavier, since it is getting a little bit taller. And I will probably add some sort of stake into this too, so that it has plenty of support as it continues to get a little bit taller. And since this one is so tall, I generally go in and wipe down the leaves by hand now, just to make sure there's nothing chilling in there, because they are really big dust magnets. I'll just take a little microfiber cloth, just like this, which is already wet, and wipe them off. Check the undersides. I've never had any pest issues on the fiddle leaf fig, but you never know when could be your first time with a pest. Now for my Thai constellation monstera. I no longer have two of these. I now officially only have this one, which I would say isn't even small anymore. It's getting up to medium size. This one I have in a super chunky mixture, so I actually sometimes water this one more than my normal routine for all of the other plants. And this one, I actually had some issues with it with spider mites like a year and a half ago. So this one I rinse down the foliage on a little bit more often than I do some of the other plants. Just a gentle rinse off on top of and underneath of the leaves, just to clean them off a little bit. And of course, when I did have spider mites, I treated the plants, but spider mites thrive in warm, dry environments. So wintertime in a heated home is the perfect environment for them to start proliferating and spreading on your houseplants. So keep an eye on that. I found that monsteras are especially vulnerable to spider mites. Those and alocasias are the ones that generally you should be on the lookout for. And plant watering time is a really great time to just check and make sure everything is looking good with your monsteras and alocasias, which I do not have any of inside right now. I have sworn off alocasias indoors just because it's too much work. I only do low maintenance plants now. That's all I do, because there are plenty of beautiful low maintenance plants, so why stress yourself out? This one here is a Euphorbia trigona. I often see this one referred to as a cactus, but it's actually a succulent. Euphorbias are succulents. They're super duper hardy, and as they get taller, they will develop these woody looking stems here, which are less like the softer new growth, just to help give it some stability as it gets taller. It also grows these nice little arms, which I think makes it look like a more traditional cactus. And these leaves up here are not supposed to be yellow and drying. Sometimes that happens to mine during the winter. It generally means the plant isn't getting enough water, but it could also be a little bit unhappy at the cooler temperatures in our sunroom in the middle of winter. And now we're down to the last three big ones that I take over to the sink. Now these I always put off for last because they're the most annoying to take over to the sink to water. This one goes above my desk and it trails on hooks along the wall, so taking it down to water is a special occasion. for sure. I usually just leave it up on its shelf in like a little drainage tray and water it up there, but it's definitely overdue for having all of its foliage rinsed off. I also have a large queen of the night epiphyllum and a huge rope plant that I'll show you now, and then we will walk over and water them. So these are a little bit harder to rinse the foliage down on, and honestly, I usually just wait until the spring or summer, and I will lug these out onto the patio and just hose them down real quick with the hose on watering day so that I can make sure to get a really solid rinse on the foliage. But for now, I just try to pile them into the sink and rinse them off as good as I can. Now this is the last big one, the one that's the biggest pain to take over here and water. And I've even trimmed this one a ton. This is my queen of the night. I don't dare trim it anymore though, because I love how big and crazy it looks. Sometimes I will trim back these long stems. And the last time I did the everything shower day of plant watering, I trimmed a bunch of cuttings off of this queen of the night, and they're all rooting in leca in this little thrifted wine glass thing that I got from Goodwill. So I'm hoping to pot all of these up separately to be their own individual plants for the Master Gardener plant sale. But until then, I think this one is safe from any additional chopping. She just needs a little rinse. And this one, it is extremely hard to rinse completely in. It's even hard to get it flat in the sink because it's just, the leaves are stiff and it's so big. I'll give you a look here of what it looks like this. So see it, it's getting to the point of where I may need to resort to the shower for this one because it is getting just a little bit unwieldy. And before we wrap up, I want to show you what I do with my bigger plants. So I have two very big plants in here, my Monstera deliciosa behind me and my Philodendron giganteum over here. And for those, I just have drainage saucers underneath of them so I can water them in place. I water them enough so that the water begins draining out of the drainage holes into the saucers. I try really hard not to let it overflow and spill everywhere, but like half the time I do anyway. And then when it gets nicer outside, similar to some of my other big hanging plants, I will just carry these out onto the patio and hose them off with a hose just to clean off the leaves because they desperately need it after a long fall and winter inside collecting dust. I can wipe the leaves down, but there's nothing better than just a good rain shower. So that wraps up all of my different plants. Everything is happy and watered and taken care of and tended to. So I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me as I watered all of my plants and did some of my routine plant maintenance. Until next time, happy planting.